Aww, isn't the baby Metroid just like the cutest little thing? Right? Like, can't you imagine running into this thing in the wild and then just absolutely falling in love with it so much that you just want it to be its parent? The answer to that question is no, because Samus is a stone cold, stoic badass, okay? This thing, meaningless to her. She doesn't care about it. It's just some stupid monster, okay? Is what I would be saying if I could only view Samus's characterization through Other M and hated it so much that it affected my judgment. Now, I'm not here to defend Other M. It definitely has its issues, but to say that Samus didn't care about the baby Metroid ignores a lot of things that are expressed by game language that I have spoken about on the Road to Dread before, so we're not going to go into that here, but we do actually have to let the little guy go, because soon we're going to arrive at Metroid Fusion. Metroid Fusion takes place after Super Metroid, but some time has passed. While escorting a team of researchers on SR-38H, she's infected by the X parasites, an enemy Samus has never encountered before. This interaction nearly kills her, as the parasite infects not only her, but also the biological components of her suit. In their attempts to save Samus, they surgically remove parts of her power armor, and even that is not enough. Somehow though, the researchers had some Metroid DNA on hand and created a vaccine which ended up completely eradicating the X parasites from Samus. After she regains consciousness, she learns of an unexplained explosion at the BSL research station and she is sent in to investigate. That is the opening of Fusion, and a couple of things stand out to me about this opening. There's a bit of care given to the Metroid vaccine, with Samus ruminating on it quite heavily, which suggests to me that Samus isn't quite over the loss of the baby Metroid. The second thing is how it closes with this seemingly out-of-place statement of Samus having to take orders and bringing up a former CO out of nowhere, but alright, I'm sure that'll pay off somewhere down the line. But right off the bat, there are some symbolic things that we can draw upon. The first is the X-parasites infecting Samus on SR-388, a location where, you know, Samus became a mother to a baby she ended up losing. Going back to this place has now left her incredibly weak and ruminating on that child. Does that sound like a depressive episode to anybody else, or nah? The rest of the game involves Samus slowly but surely regaining her previous strength, or, you know, digging herself out of the pit she finds herself in and getting back to level ground. But some of you are probably well-actualing me about how that's just the nature of the exploration adventure genre, starting from zero and going up. And like in the last video, goddammit, it can be both things. While we're here talking about the game's overall structure, many people find Fusion's linearity a little bit antithetical to the genre, and negatively impacting the game. I used to be part of that camp, and though the game doesn't feel as fun to play as, say, the freedom that you get with Super Metroid, I now feel like that is very much the point. I think it serves a nice purpose of taking away Samus's agency within the story. People with depression aren't all that free mentally, and for many, doing anything requires some kind of external force to act upon them. Or if you are really uncomfortable with that reading, Samus is recovering from surgery, so is it not natural for her to require guidance and restriction in order to recover? And is it not also appropriate for this to be expressed via the more guided and restricted design of the game, to place upon you those same feelings of recovery that Samus is going through? As Samus gets stronger and begins to recover, that linearity is broken somewhat, and the game feels more like Metroid. But we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here. Let's go back and talk about what it is that allows her to confront this X-parasite threat in the first place, and what it represents more broadly. Alright, so we have established the Metroid vaccine that allows Samus to be immune to the X-parasites, right? And it's not just any Metroid DNA, it is specifically the babies. The game also features the reveal of the Metroid breeding program, so they could have used this moment to foreshadow that, but instead, they decided to focus on the baby Metroid. So, one way to read that, even though it is very cheesy, is that Samus is now carrying the spirit of the baby Metroid with her. You know, her love, or, compassion, in a way, not only prevented her death, but now serve as her means of sustaining herself throughout the game. By absorbing the X parasites, she can regain health and ammo. Additionally, after destroying a boss, she's able to absorb one of those bigger guys, these core X's, and regain a latent ability. So by dealing with the threat directly, she's able to regain some of her previous power. Recovery isn't all that clear-cut though, because there is a specter that haunts many who have depression, and that is themselves. And what is it the X-Parasites do again? Oh, that's right, they create clones! Now, clones and doppelgangers and whatnot have been used plenty throughout science fiction to explore things like identity and, stuff of that nature. So, the choice to have the X-Parasites as big ol' cloning cloners is what tips the narrative over for me into the realm of depression over just, recovery in general. So is it all that surprising for this story, which is ostensibly about getting over a past trauma, to involve a destructive, mindless clone of yourself that gets in the way? The game dubs this the SA-X, and it represents a conflicting duality of identity. There's old Samus, the Samus before the baby entered her life, one that would go in, do the mission without question, and exterminate everything that was in her path. And current Samus, the one who became a mother, is actively thinking and even questioning orders. The SA-X is mindless, cold, and destructive, but that combination is powerful. And current Samus can only flee. She does not yet have the tools she needs to confront her past self and the trauma that lies there. Getting back to normal in Metroid Fusion is another duality, one that involves absorbing the X parasites and regaining those latent abilities. The other is going to data rooms and downloading upgrades that essentially mimic and improve previous powers. The context for these data rooms is basically always that you are told, or perhaps guided would be a better term, to get them. They are the work of scientists, or specialists, that help Samus regain her strength. The message here being that we can't do this alone. I think there is a misconception out there that acceptance is a passive resignation for things that are outside of our control. Sort of a giving in to nihilism. But I think the problem with that mindset is that it doesn't take into account the bigger picture. After all, resignation and acceptance are two different words. Resignation to me is only half the picture. It only sees what is bad, and that's it. Whereas acceptance is a bigger, fuller understanding. It is aware of how bad things are, but also what you can do about it. So in light of that and my assertion that Fusion is about depression and acceptance, I think it is quite apt that half the battle for returning to normalcy in this game is about data, and using it to adapt to the terrible situation you find yourself in. Yeah, it absolutely sucks that you can't use the Ice Beam anymore, but if you download this data, you can sort of achieve the same result if we put it into your missiles. You accept your inability to do the thing you want/used to be able to do, but find a way to get by without it. The way the game goes about the upgrade system is now split into two compared to all previous titles. You must harness and reclaim the stuff that you still have, but also through guidance and knowledge adapt and achieve your goals in new ways. That is what it means to accept things, not resignation, but understanding and adaptation. In the game's language, when Samus has more or less achieved that level of acceptance and is as close to normal as possible, are you able to find all of these extra shortcuts in between zones, and the game really opens up for a brief period before you get to the ending. Actual acceptance is a liberating thing, and the game reflects that in its structure, opening up only really toward the end when this occurs thematically. Once you've had your fill collecting items and whatnot, it is time to have that face-to-face with the SA-X. And a very interesting thing happens here. Every other battle with an X host has damage indicated through different animations and whatnot. but once defeated just spawns the Core X. It's only here against Samus's doppelganger that the form breaks down. Thus far, we've been looking at the SA-X as a representation of Samus's past self, specifically the past self that was destructive and unthinking. In this battle, once you've defeated the facade, you reveal a monster, and doesn't that just make sense? That part of you that is willing to commit a xenocide and just follow orders is a monster when you get down to it. Current you is wiser, more self-aware. And with that new outlook comes the ability to see your past self for what it truly is. It isn't you. It might wear your face and your armor, but if you confront it, which is the most difficult part of this fight, its monstrous form is then revealed. And it just turns out to be this big stupid thing that just jumps up and down. It's quite easy to defeat. But it's only when you've excised this bad part of your past can you move on. And just before we get to the finale, there's something that I want to close out, something I've said a couple of times, and that's the game's dualities. There are just a ton of things where the game will set up two opposing concepts and then proceed to blur the line between them. Starting with the Galactic Federation, whom have thus far been pretty much the good force. After all, they are who Samus gets her missions from, so we assume that they're good. Here though, the Metroid breeding program and their desire to want the SA-X later on in the game mixes in the idea of evil intentions to what we assume is a good force. It sets up the X parasites as, parasites, these mindless things. But as the game progresses, subtly and then not so subtly, begins to show us they seem to have some kind of collective intelligence or will. Merging those two concepts. A similar thing is done with Samus and her upgrade path, which combines both the innate dumb abilities and the more external intelligent data downloads. Super Metroid introduced beam stacking and charging, and that has now been applied to the missiles, the upgrades for which have been integrated together such that missiles can now also stack and charge. And coincidentally, both the jump ball and the high jump have been joined into one power-up this time around. So I'm running out of synonyms here, but there's more. So a few of the enemies, namely the Nightmare and the BOX security robot, are thought to be purely mechanical, but are actually an amalgamation of an organic neural network and a mechanical shell, which is what allows them to be hosts to the X parasites. Even in the story, the AI that orders Samus around turns out to be the uploaded consciousness of a former actual living and breathing commanding officer, Adam, which essentially No, man. I refuse to use that word and acknowledge the fact that it's taken me 15 goddamn years to figure out the connection between the game's themes and its title, alright? No! Alright, so now that existential crisis is out of the way, we can return to the finale where Samus must just escape the space station after setting it on a collision course with SR388. Almost like she can finally let go of that planet and move on to different things. Samus reaches the docking bay to find that her ship is gone, and is then accosted by an Omega Metroid. Even though she was able to best her past self with the help of some newfound abilities, she is not actually back at her previous power level. Remember, Metroid 2 Samus would have taken this guy out no problems, but Samus lacks the penetrative power of her past self, and so is helpless against this new threat. But, speak of the devil, the SA-X comes in to try and destroy its arch-nemesis, but fails due to being weakened by Samus earlier. It's at this moment that Samus can jump up, absorb the SA-X's Core X parasite and regain the ability to use the Ice Beam. Samus having the Metroid DNA serves as a core strength for her to get back to where she was. It represents her love, her compassion. But that can be seen as a weakness, limiting her from reaching her previous power level, which is represented by the SA-X. What we have seen, though, is the result of the SA-X's power. It is cold and destructive, but it too is lacking. To truly be strong and survive, you must have power and have compassion. Either one individually will have you fail. One is too destructive, the other too weak, but together, unstoppable. Thematically, this is the reward that you get for defeating that monster inside of you. It's just delayed to this point to send a larger message, which is that once you have defeated your inner demons, you now are internally more chill and thus can use the Ice Beam. Huh? I probably shouldn't undercut the message by framing it in such a stupid way, but I'm an idiot, so it's fine, whatever. I really should have just left it at that, but okay, I'll clarify. Sakamoto answered this question in a Q&A that is hosted on the Metroid database and said that the absorption more or less recovered her to a previous genetic condition. It sort of overwrote the Metroid DNA. Now, this supports some of the reading that I've had in regards to the SA-X and what it represents, but I think there is a little bit of ambiguity around whether or not all of the Metroid DNA is actually gone or not. But since this game is all about fusion, and how I've read the SA-X and, excising its monster form, I think a similar thing can be applied here to the Metroid DNA and say that the weakness of the Metroid DNA has been excised, but otherwise it is still part of Samus. Either way, it's all, in one way or another, a fusion and getting something better out of it. I want to make one final detour before we get to the game's conclusion and talk about a couple of bosses that I think illustrate that point further. First, we have Nettori, which appears to be an upright Chozo statue that isn't doing anything, with the main threats coming from the plants that seem to be growing out of it. Within the series, the Chozo are mostly peaceful, with a few being aggressive. Here though, we see a Chozo statue which I assume is of the peaceful variety, because the X-Parasites can't seem to leverage it for attacks like every other boss in the game, so it must use it as a source of energy instead. I think it is an example of the weakness that comes with compassion, the ability for others to use you, take advantage, drain your life force from you. When you fight it and deal enough damage, you reveal that there is, of course, strength there, but even then, when chained up like this, it is quite feeble, lacking variety, adaptability. And on the other hand, you have Ridley, a boss that just absolutely reinforces the idea of unchecked, raw power. It is a selfish thing, taking up as much space as possible, ramming itself wherever it wants to go, and even on the audio side, overwhelming everything else as much as it can with its screeches. It is not infallible though, it has no allies, no protection, and so basically all of Ridley is damageable, and often, even when you aren't even facing him, as he grabs you, you still land a hit. If we go back to right before the showdown, there is a moment where Adam doesn't let you pass. Samus has this argument with him that essentially boils down to, I want to blow myself up to save the universe. And Adam is like, yo, that's a bad plan. You not have a brain? How did previous me seriously let you live? I'm not getting it here. And after some more chatter, Samus's reminder of her value as an armored flesh bag with compassion combined with his more calculated intelligence, one that utilizes that destructive power, but in a much more specific and thoughtful way. He allows the living and breathing Samus to progress. And if not to drive home that point again, we can jump back into the ending. After defeating the Omega Metroid, it would seem like our time is up. We have no way to flee, except it turns out that those little critters managed to save the day. The ship on its own would have been left there and destroyed, but because of Samus's compassion, unlike Ridley, she has support, and we have organic and artificial intelligence teaming up to help her survive. Yet another fusion. And additionally, one of the things that's really important about this ending is that Samus blows up SR388, and her reliance and weakness caused by the infant Metroid's DNA is gone. Which to me symbolically means that she has finally let go of the baby Metroid and is moving on, which fits the theme of acceptance quite nicely, I think. I made mention of the 3 pillars of Nintendo at the start of this video series, and so to end things, I would like to complete that concept somewhat. They aren't just the games that formed Nintendo's early foundation, but conceptually, each carve out an artistic niche. On the right, you have Mario. Every Mario game aims to explore what we humans find fun and joyful. It paints in the positive part of the emotional spectrum. The Legend of Zelda is in the middle, dealing predominantly with adventurous themes of growth, knowledge, experimentation, courage, etc. Metroid on the left, very aptly countering Mario, covers almost exclusively the negative parts of the emotional spectrum. What makes Metroid unique is how much more personal it is than the other two. Mario is a cartoon character, ever present, and though Link is more human, he is nevertheless the hero of time, a conceptual vessel, and that series' games take place across eons. Ever since Metroid 2, Sakamoto made the series about Samus, a specific human person, and thus as a franchise can deal with very personal feelings and stories, rather than broad emotional concepts. Fusion deals with the fallout of a mother who has lost her child. When the adrenaline rush of rage and revenge has subsided, you're left with just memories, rumination. This understandably leaves you in a very weak and vulnerable place, a hole that you must get yourself out of, even if part of what's keeping you in there is yourself. Acceptance is key to getting back to normal, but so is help. And remember, the goal is merely to get out of the pit and get back to level ground, to where you were. The end of Fusion does not involve Samus reaching a new peak, it is merely getting back to where she was, and that is a triumph in and of itself. It's going to be interesting to see what happens next for Metroid. If the title of Fusion is as indicative of what its game contained, I think it's safe to say that Metroid Dread is going to be about fear. The series is still about Samus, an individual human being, so there are plenty of fears to cover, and my money is on the fear of death. Now, I don't think they're actually going to kill Samus. After all, these games have been shown to be about overcoming. That might change. The games are also known for their twists, but I think the best of Metroid is about being somewhere and getting stronger, of tackling those negative emotions, but still coming out the other side. Whether it's looking at Mario and doing the opposite, dealing with the loss of a child, or potentially with Dread, your own mortality. The series of Metroid is about getting past those things, about moving forward. Whether it is left or right, up or down, no matter how large the pit you find yourself in, you can move forward. So do so with reckless